Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I would like to give you some updates on recent hauls I have posted over the past month or so. A Brazil import from Lucca Orchideen and then a purchase from Berlin Orchideen when I visited there when my parents were here. First off, I would like to talk about two actually of the Lucca plants. Lelia purpurata roxo-bispo. This is a color form of Lelia purpurata or Cattleya purpurata, which has kind of a darker magenta lip color. So bispo is Portuguese and means bishop, so I guess this is supposed to be reminiscent of like this magenta purple color of the traditional robes I guess a bishop would wear. Sorry, I don't really know the correct terminology in English. So as you can see, these plants have been really well behaved. They've been putting out roots. The tips seem a little dark, so I'm not sure about that. I don't know how I feel about that. Also, the roots themselves have like these darker spots. Yeah, not 100% sure how I feel about that. Next up we have the Laelia milleri or Cattleya milleri, I guess you would call it now. This is a ridiculous Lelia, which has been on my wish list forever, and you can see this is starting quite a few new growths. On top of that, there's also a root sprouting, so I'm just taking this out of the sphagnum now and I'll just put it into its final pot, hoping that the root growth will pick up pace very quickly and give me a nice root system. And then last but not least, this is Lelia jongheana. I don't know how to really pronounce that. Jongheana. You can see this is a pretty shriveled plant, which it was when I got it. But the issue is that the roots that I thought were viable and really well off really aren't. So it kind of dropped. All of these roots are dead now. There are new ones coming, but I don't feel comfortable having it in a bark setup right now. I would like to get a little more sphagnum around its roots to, So yeah, this is what we're doing today, and since I have the Lelia jongheana in my hand right now, that's just what I'm gonna start with. I just have the pot that I had used with it before, and I'm just going to add some sphagnum moss on the bottom, almost as like a hydration buffer. And then on top of that, I'm just going to add moderate layer of mixture between bark and moss, sphagnum moss that is. And then on top of that, I'm just going to place some more sphagnum. I really like doing this because when I now place the plant on top, it has the sphagnum moss which holds a lot of moisture and kind of helps the roots grow really well. I grow my plants under very dry conditions, so there isn't a lot of ambient humidity. So having the sphagnum there is really going to provide the plants with the moisture they need in the beginning. I'm just going to keep these old roots on because I can use them to give the plant a little bit of stability in the pot right now. Don't want it to wobble around too much because this can harm the roots as well. Which now come to think about it is maybe what happened to the purpuradas because I've been fiddling with them a bit. But anyway, I have the bed of sphagnum here. And so I'm just going to place the plant on top. I'll place it as much as possible to one side. And then I will try to fix it with a little stake. Back in the day we used to burn people at the stake. Nowadays I really only use them to secure plants into place. Not too much of a traditionalist. I feel like it's going to be a little difficult to show this, but there's like this little back bulb here. I'm just going to try to wedge the stake around that so I can get a nice grip into the media without jeopardizing the new root growth. And then basically I just make sure that any newly emerging roots are in contact with sphagnum moss. And then I just top it off with a little bit of the fine bark that I like to use as a top layer. And there you go, this is plant number 1 dealt with, the Lelia jongheana. Next up, the purpuradas. I am going to put them into separate pots. I feel like last year I would not have done that, but I have learned that disentangling plants that share a pot can be a little bit of a hassle, so I'd like to keep them separate. So I have these two pots here. As always, we start off with a thin and fluffy layer of sphagnum on the bottom. I like to do that because, as I said, it kind of acts like a water reservoir, and I'm really not an avid waterer, so I like to water my plants only once a week. Maybe during summer I can accept to water them twice a week, but that's already a lot of work, so I'd rather keep that to a minimum. So the sphagnum moss here is really helping me to keep a little bit of moisture in the pot. It's like a water reservoir if you think about semi-hydroponics. And then again, I'm just gonna put a layer of bark and moss mixture. This is, in my opinion, a really good bark for younger Cattleyas because it's not so coarse that the roots get lost in between the air pockets. And then as for the jongheana, I'm going to use like a little stake that I wedge between like the back bulb to keep them in place. For these young plants, I don't really like to use too much media. They're gonna have to be repotted pretty soon anyways. And by kind of covering them in the pot like this, I also keep the humidity around them a little higher so they really like to grow new roots. This is also what I did with imports from last year and it worked really well. Yeah, I'm just sticking to that. And I'm just adding a little more bark on top now just to make sure the roots are not naked. But at the same time, I try to not cover the rhizome because I don't want the plant to rot. This one doesn't really want to sit stably in the pot, so I'm just gonna use a second stake to secure it from the other side. And I think this is kind of giving it the stability it needs in its life. So there you go, gorge. So, and then last but definitely not least, Laelia milleri. Really glad that this spot here on Swan Leaf didn't spread any further. So I guess this is really just a little bit of a cold burn. So thin layer of moss, thin layer of bark, and this one is also gonna go on top of like a sphagnum bed basically because there are no real roots now. There are some starting, but you know, have to baby it. But at the same time, also a little impatient with it just sitting in pure sphagnum. I feel like it's not weak enough to need really the pampering in the only sphagnum bed that I do with imports. This plant has a lot of reserves in its bulb, so just push out new roots, gorge, and it's gonna be fine. So there you go, this is kind of the bed of sphagnum. I'm just going to place the plant as with all of the ones before. I'm also going to stake this a little bit. I'm just going to add some of my fine bark as the top layer. This is mainly to keep this moss bed humid for longer. I like to use the fine bark as a top layer for this one because I feel like sometimes Ridiculous Lelias don't really like to grow roots as readily as the purpuradas, which already have also longer roots, so I feel like they can handle this, but for the Repotting Lelia, I would like to give it just a little bit more care. I will give you updates once they're due, and with that said, thanks a lot for watching, and yeah, I'll talk to you later. Boom!